My name is Travis Barker, and I want to tell you about the day my life split into a before and an after. We've been trying for almost a year. Alice had taken 6 pregnancy tests over 3 months, all negative, and I watched her cry in the bathroom doorway each time with a kind of quiet devastation that made me feel helpless in ways I didn't have words for. So when the 7th test came back positive, I cried too. I'm not ashamed of that. I stood in our kitchen in Columbus at 6 in the morning, holding a plastic stick, and cried like I was 11 years old again. The ultrasound appointment was a Tuesday. Alice was dressed in that pale yellow blouse I always loved, the one she wore the first time she met my brother Dean. She was nervous. I could tell because she kept touching her earrings, this little habit she had, her fingers going up to her left ear every few minutes like she was checking it was still there. I reached across the center console and held her hand. She grabbed it back so tightly I thought something was wrong. "Everything's fine," I told her. "We're just going to see the heartbeat." She nodded. She didn't say anything. I should have noticed that. Alice always had something to say. Riverside Women's Clinic was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like antiseptic and warm air from the vents. The waiting room had the kind of muted colors that are supposed to be calming, but just feel like the world turned its volume down. We sat next to each other, Alice scrolling her phone without really seeing anything on it, me reading a pamphlet about folic acid I'd already read twice. When they called us back, the room was small and dim, the kind of dark that feels medical, necessary, but uncomfortable. Sandra Okafor introduced herself as our technician. She was a heavy-set woman with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had the practiced calm of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She was friendly. She made a small joke about the gel being cold. Alice laughed a little. Sandra pressed the transducer to Alice's abdomen and turned to the monitor. I was watching the screen. I don't know what I was looking for. I'd never seen an ultrasound in person before. It looked like static and shadows to me, a gray world shifting beneath the surface. But Sandra's face changed. It was subtle. It was the kind of change most people would miss. A slight stillness. A pause that lasted half a second too long before she moved the wand again. Her jaw set in a way that had nothing to do with the cold gel. I looked at Alice. Alice was looking at the ceiling. Sandra completed the scan with the same professional warmth she'd carried in. She printed measurements, labeled images, said the heartbeat was strong. Alice exhaled so visibly that I felt her shoulders drop from across the room. Then Sandra said something that seemed small. "Alice, would you mind stepping to the front desk? We need your updated insurance card scanned. It's just a 1-minute thing. They should have caught it check-in." Alice sat up. She looked at Sandra. Something moved between them that I couldn't read. Quick, private, like a signal sent in a frequency I didn't have a receiver for. Then Alice nodded and left the room. I thought nothing of it. Insurance paperwork was exactly the kind of mundane thing I expected on a day like this. Sandra turned back to the monitor. She began closing windows on the screen, organizing the images. Then she stopped. She turned to me. She took her glasses off her forehead and held them in her hand, and she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "Mr. Barker, divorce your wife." I actually laughed. A small, confused sound. Not because it was funny, but because my brain refused to process it as a real sentence. "I'm sorry," I said, but she had already turned back to the screen, and she said nothing else. Alice came back 2 minutes later, holding her insurance card and a receipt for parking validation. She was smiling, the smile of someone who has successfully completed a task. In the elevator down, I replayed it. "Divorce your wife." 3 words, said quietly, said clearly. Said by a woman who had been doing her job with the controlled precision of a professional and then broken protocol in a single breath. I replayed Alice's face when Sandra asked her to step out. I didn't say anything until we reached the car. "Something weird happened when you left," I said. Alice put on her seatbelt. "What do you mean?" "The nurse, Sandra. She said something to me." "What did she say?" I looked at her. I watched her face with the kind of attention I'd never brought to it before. "She said I should divorce you." Alice stared at me. Then she laughed, short, dismissive, a laugh that was doing work. "Travis." She said what? "Divorce your wife." Those exact words. "Baby, She touched my arm. You must have misheard her. You were probably nervous, and she said something totally normal in your brain. I didn't mishear it, Alice. People don't say that to strangers. That doesn't make any sense. We drove home in a silence that felt different from every silence we'd ever had before. I looked at Alice's hand on her lap, the hand I'd held in the waiting room. I thought about how tightly she'd gripped mine. I thought about how that grip might have been less about fear of the ultrasound and more about fear of something else entirely. I didn't sleep that night. Alice was asleep by 10. The pregnancy exhaustion was real, she'd said. I lay beside her for an hour. Then I got up and went to the kitchen. I opened my laptop and I searched. Ultrasound nurse says divorce your wife. The results were not what I expected. Forum posts, Reddit threads, a few confessional videos, and buried in one of the threads, a woman describing almost exactly what I had experienced. A nurse, a quiet whisper, a husband who didn't understand. The thread explained it with two words I had never encountered in combination before: gestational dating. I searched that next. What I found in the next 40 minutes dismantled something in my chest. Gestational dating is how doctors determine how far along a pregnancy is. Not based on the last period, not based on a test date, but based on the size of the embryo. The measurements on the screen, measurements so precise they could locate conception within a window of days. I had been in Denver for 3 weeks in August, a project deadline. I remembered it exactly because Alice had sent me a care package, hand cream, a novel, a handwritten note that said, "Come home soon. The bed is too big." I still had the note in my work bag. I pulled up my work calendar. I found the Denver trip. I found the dates. I sat in my kitchen at 2 a.m. and did math that no husband should ever have to do. The window didn't match. I didn't confront Alice. Not yet. I knew myself well enough to know that if I went to her without certainty, without something concrete, she would manage me. Alice was brilliant at managing situations, at finding the explanation that made the discomfort go away. She had a gift for it, the kind of gift that looks like warmth until you realize it's been redirected at you. I called Riverside Women's Clinic at 8 a.m. when they opened. I asked to speak with Sandra Okafor. They told me Sandra wasn't available and asked if I wanted to leave a message. I said no. I asked if I could speak with a technician about the measurements from yesterday's scan, about the gestational dating. "I'm sorry, sir. We can only release that information to the patient. She's my wife." "I understand, sir. HIPAA guidelines require." I hung up. I drove there instead. Sandra was in the lobby when I arrived, coat on, heading somewhere. She saw me, and she stopped. And for a second, I saw in her face, not surprise, recognition, like she had been expecting this. I said quietly, "What did you see on that screen?" She looked around. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Barker, I cannot discuss patient records, but I can tell you that a man who does his own research and finds his own answers does not need me to confirm anything." She walked past me and through the door. I drove to Dean's house. I don't know why Dean specifically. Maybe because he was the only person I trusted to tell me the truth without softening it first. Dean wasn't built for soft. He told me our mother was dying before anyone else had the nerve to. He told me my first car was a lemon when I was proud of it. He was the person in my life immune to the instinct to protect feelings at the expense of facts. I sat in his kitchen and I laid out everything. The nurse's words, the Denver dates, the gestational math, the clinic visit that morning. Dean didn't say anything for a long time. He was sitting across from me at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug he wasn't drinking from. Then he put the mug down. He put his face in his hands. And he said, "I'm so sorry, Travis. I should have told you 6 months ago." The room tilted. "Told me what?" He looked up. His eyes were red. Dean, who I had never seen cry. Not once. Not even when her mother died. "I saw Alice," he said, "in October. At Marcello's on 5th. She was with a man. It wasn't nothing, Travis. I wanted to tell you. I kept trying to find the way, and I held up my hand. I needed him to stop. I sat there in my brother's kitchen and felt something very quiet and very final settle over me. Not rage, not grief, something closer to the absence of both. I went home. Alice was in the living room, on a video call with her mother. I could hear Diane's clipped, deliberate voice even from the hallway. Alice didn't hear me come in. I stood in the hall for a moment. I heard Alice say quietly, "It's fine, Mom." It went fine. Travis didn't. And then she heard me and turned around, and she ended the call with a speed that she immediately tried to cover with a smile. "Hey, I didn't hear you come in. I went for a drive," I said. I sat on the couch. I watched her. She sat across from me and told me about her morning, a podcast she'd been listening to, a craving for Vietnamese food, a thought about the nursery color. That night, when she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I think part of me had already decided. The contact name was Dr. L. The preview text was visible without unlocking the phone. It said, "Did it go okay today? Does he know?" I set the phone down exactly as it had been. Face down, same angle. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the faucet in the sink, and stood there with the water running, staring at my own face in the mirror until the shower turned off. I didn't sleep again. By 4 a.m., I had made a decision. Not about the marriage, not yet, but about the pretending. I was done pretending. At 7:04 a.m., my phone rang. Diane Crown. I answered. "Travis." Her voice was the same as always, composed, upper register, the voice of a woman who had never once been caught off guard. "I think we should talk before things get complicated." "Good morning, Diane. Alice told me you've been asking questions. I want you to understand that what happened is not what it looks like, and there are ways to handle this that don't have to destroy anyone's life." I said nothing. "You're a sensible man," Diane continued. "A private man. You don't want this to become a thing people talk about. Alice is young. She made a mistake. But that child is." "Diane," I said. "Yes. If you call me again before I've spoken to a lawyer, I will consider it harassment." Silence. A long, frozen silence. "Let's not make this ugly," she said. "I didn't make it anything," I said. "I just found out what it already was." I hung up. I moved out that afternoon. I went to a Marriott 6 miles from our house. I texted Alice one sentence. "I need a few days. Don't call." She respected it for 18 hours. At 11 p.m. on the second night, there was a knock on my hotel room door. She was in the same pale yellow blouse from the ultrasound appointment. She hadn't done her hair. Her eyes were swollen. For the first time in 3 years, I saw Alice Barker with nothing managed about her. No presentation, no smoothness, no careful placement of words. She stood in the doorway and she said, "I don't know." I stared at her. "About the baby." Her voice broke. "Travis, I don't know. It could be yours. The doctor said the dating isn't exact. There's a margin, a window, and you and I were still. We were together in that window too, Travis. I need you to hear that." "How long?" I asked. She closed her eyes. 8 months. The number sat in the air between us like a sentence. 8 months, Alice. I know. 8 months. And you let me cry over that pregnancy test. I know. She was crying now. I know. Travis, I'm so sorry. Don't. I held my hand up. Don't apologize to me right now. I can't. I can't hear that right now. She stood in the doorway of my hotel room for a long time. Neither of us moved. Outside, a car alarm sounded somewhere in the parking lot and then stopped. "What do you want me to do?" she finally asked. "I want to know whose child that is," I said. "And I want the truth. I want all of it. Not the version you decided I could handle. All of it." We did the test. A prenatal paternity test. Non-invasive, blood-based, safe for the baby. It took 11 days. I know because I counted every one of them. I didn't talk to Alice during those 11 days. I talked to a lawyer. I talked to Dean. I didn't eat very well. I ran a lot, more than I ever had, pounding pavements at 5 a.m. in the dark, trying to process something my body understood before my mind could catch up to it. On day 11, the results arrived by email at 6:17 in the morning. I sat in my hotel room. I opened it. I read it. I read it again. I sat very still for about 5 minutes. Then I called Dean. "It's mine," I said. He exhaled slowly. "Travis, the baby is mine." Dean didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What does that mean for you?" I thought about that question. What did it mean? It meant the baby was mine. It didn't mean 8 months of lies were not 8 months of lies. It didn't mean the man named Marcus Reed didn't exist. It didn't mean Alice's mother hadn't called me at 7 a.m. to manage the situation. It didn't mean Sandra Okafor was wrong to say what she said. She had seen something real. She had responded to something real. But it also meant there was a child. My child. Growing in the woman I had married. And I was an engineer. I dealt in structures. In things that could be rebuilt if the foundation was addressed correctly. I don't know what it means yet, I told Dean. Fair, he said. The baby came on a Thursday in March. A boy. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He came out with Travis's father's nose. That same wide bridge, unmistakable. And I held him for the first time and felt the kind of love I had spent my whole life trying not to feel because I had watched my father lose everything when it was taken from him. I held my son and I thought about Sandra Okafor. I thought about what she had whispered. Divorce your wife. I used to think she was telling me to run, to save myself before the truth came out. But standing there in that delivery room with my child in my arms, I understood something different. She had seen a dating discrepancy. She had seen what she thought was a child that wasn't mine. She had done what her own grief had trained her to do. She had tried to give me what no one had given her daughter. Early truth. She was right to try. She was working with incomplete information, but she was right to try. Alice was in the bed beside me, exhausted and watching my face. We were not the same couple who walked into Riverside Women's Clinic that Tuesday. We were not going to be that couple again. We had 3 months of hard conversations behind us and more ahead. I had moved back home, not because everything was fixed, but because I had decided that fixing it was worth trying before I walked away from the thing my father never recovered from losing. Alice held out her hand. I looked at it for a moment. Then I gave her our son, and she pulled him to her chest, and for a while none of us said anything at all. Some things break you open, and what grows inside that opening, whether it's bitterness or something harder and better, is the only choice that ever really belonged to you. My name is Travis Barker, and I'm still deciding.